Thank you, Andrew. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here together on the Lord's Day and worship the Lord in spirit and truth. If you're visiting with us, we are thrilled by your presence here. We hope this will be an encouraging experience for you and that you'll be uplifted by our praise and our study of God's Word. We are engaged in a series right now on time. We're calling it Timeless, God's Eternal Guide for Living in Time. And I want to do a little review as we begin from last week, just a little bit from what we talked about in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 through 17. If you'll recall, that passage is where you have that famous phrase, redeeming the time, which is more literally making the best use of every opportunity. That's the idea in that passage. And a lot of that passage, really the overall idea of the passage, is living according to the will of God, knowing the will of God and being wise, not unwise, and being filled with the Spirit instead of wine. The idea is we should seek to understand God's will for our lives because that's what's best for us, and His will can be understood. Now, the will of God is not some invisible blueprint that we have to discover on our own and God giving us hints here and there. A lot of people think that because they're thinking in an individualized way about the will of God. God has a will for me to marry this person or that person. He has a place for me to live, a career for me to do. And I can't find it in His Word, but it's out there. I just need to feel my way to it. The other side of that is if you happen to make a mistake, you're condemned, and the Lord never really told you how to do it. What kind of a God would do something like that? That's not the proper way to look at the will of God. The will of God for us is to seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. The will of God is for us to lead holy lives. The will of God is for us to do what is righteous and good and follow after the character of God. And then we have an amazing amount of freedom within that framework. We can. There are many different people that are eligible for us to marry. There are a number of different career paths we could take, all being within the will of God. So we need to look at what's right, what's pure, what's loving, what's true, what's holy, pursue that, and use our discretion within that framework. We're picking up this morning where we left off last week. We're still thinking about the will of God, and we're exploring that further. And what we find when we turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 is that everything can be in the will of God. Everything. The text begins saying this, for everything there is a season. For everything. And you follow that with 14 statements of polarity. In other words, antithetical opposites. There's a time to be born, for example, and a time to die. 28 different activities are listed here, and it's not a comprehensive list, but the idea is the scope is so broad here. There's time for being born, there's a time to die, time to plant, time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, and so on, that everything in its time can be within the will of God. But the appropriateness of any given action is determined by time. More specifically, by the season that you are in. So some actions are wrong because you're doing them in the wrong season. Some actions are right when you consider the timing of them. That's what makes this such an interesting and important text for us to study this morning. We're going to be thinking about seasons. Here's the science behind seasons. We're in the midst of a transformation from winter to spring right now. And all of this is due to the position of the earth on its axis. The earth is not sitting upright. It leans 23.5 degrees from a straight line on an axis. And so as it makes its way around the sun, temperatures vary. Sunlight, the duration of sunlight varies. When it's on one side of the orbit, and the southern hemisphere is leaning toward the sun, the northern hemisphere is leaning away from the sun, we experience winter and our days are shorter. On the other end of the orbit, it's the opposite. We're experiencing longer days in summer while the southern hemisphere is experiencing shorter days in winter. Jason and Taylor just got back from Peru. And in Peru, they're in the opposite end of seasons than we are. It's interesting how you can go from north to south and things totally change. And it's all because the earth is leaning on its axis that way. And so we behave according to this seasonal calendar that we're on due to the tilt of the earth on its axis. We plant crops in the spring, we harvest in the fall. We bundle up in the winter, and we get out more in the summer. These are things that make life possible, and the light of summer grants the harvest of autumn. Well, Solomon is saying here there are spiritual seasons in life as well. And just as the cosmic seasons determine our behavior and activities in certain ways, spiritual seasons determine what is within the will of God and what is not. And so the appropriateness of any given action depends on what season we are in. Now, some people may say everything can't be considered within the scope of God, even if you take seasons into account, because there are some things that are always wrong and there are some things that are always right. For example, lying, killing, laziness, that's always wrong. It's true, but what makes certain information a lie? All information, given the season, can be correct. It's just the context in which the information is communicated. In some contexts, a particular statement could be true, whereas in other contexts, it could be a lie. Killing. Yes, murder is always wrong. Murder is killing at the wrong time for the wrong reason and the wrong person. But even if you don't regard some acceptable forms of, lawful forms of murder, like killing, like war and the death penalty, even if you consider that wrong, there are things that we need to kill in our lives, right? Spiritually speaking, we're to put to death what is fleshly in us. Colossians chapter 3, verses 5 and following. So there are forms of killing that are appropriate given the season and the subject of it and so forth. Another example we gave a minute ago, laziness. Laziness is always wrong, but laziness is just resting at the wrong time. Rest, inactivity, cessation from labor is important. In fact, it's codified in the Old Testament with the Sabbath ordinance. And so it's not the action itself, but it's the context of the action that's important. Someone says, well, loving is always right. Well, it depends on what you're loving and when you're loving it. And yes, we're to love our enemies, but there are certain things that we shouldn't love. And then when it comes to people, even love is relative. Aren't we told that in comparison to God, we should hate our families? I know this is a figure of speech, but it's all due to seasons and changes and context. And so, in a manner of speaking, everything is the will of God, but the activity is determined by the context of the season we are in. Let's look at the wisdom of Solomon to discern the will of God in this particular season of our lives. We're going to notice three things about everything. First, there's a time for everything. Secondly, there is the maker of everything. And then finally, I want to look at the answer for everything. So let's start with a time for everything in verses 1 through 8, which is what Andrew read for us a moment ago. And again, I'll highlight the very opening here. Everything, for everything, there is a season. Solomon is talking in terms of seasons. And I want to make several points about what that means, the implications of that. And first of all, notice that when he speaks of time in terms of seasons, he's talking about long periods of time. He's speaking of duration, not one-time events. A season on our calendar lasts about 3 months. And our lives are not governed really by minutes and days and months, but in seasons. In other words, we don't talk in terms of what hour it is, not really. I mean, when we have an appointment to go to or something like that, we might might say, we need to be there by 6 o'clock. We don't say, my life is at 6 o'clock right now. Or this is the third hour for me. We say, I'm in a very difficult period of time in my life. Or I'm raising my children. Or we think back on things and we say, I believe that happened before the pandemic. We say this, we frame everything around that COVID pandemic nowadays. Or that was before my children were born. Or that was after my husband died. That's how we frame things these days. That's how we've always framed things, in terms of season, long periods of time, rather than what the clock says or what's on the calendar or what year it was. These periods of time are the framework of our lives. Another thing about seasons is they're involuntary. When you think of time that way, it's not a time frame or a period that you've brought onto yourself. We don't have any control over when spring arrives or when winter comes. It comes whether we're ready for it or not. Some of you are ready for that heat to get here. I'd still like a few more cool mornings before I wake up and it's already 85 degrees. But I don't have any control over that. It's coming whether I like it or not. In Alabama, the summer lasts long, and that's just a part of living on this part of the globe in this time of the year. Seasons are involuntary. If we endure them properly, that means we have to rely on God. We have to give up a lot of our control and understand and acknowledge that God is in control of things. Some examples. Child rearing is a season of life. You can't pursue your own ambitions so much when your children are young. You have to give them the most of your attention. You have to schedule your life around their needs. When it's nap time, you got to be able to put them down for a nap. When it's bedtime, they need to go to bed. Whenever they need to eat, you have to stop what you're doing and prepare things for them. Sometimes there's a season of caring for a loved one. Maybe you have an aging parent that has to move into your home and you have to care for him or her. And again, life slows down. Your own things get put aside as you take care of the other person. There are times for rest where life slows down. And maybe you're between jobs, or maybe there's something that slows life down. And that's something you can take advantage of. And some of us want to speed things up and make things happen and get employed as soon as possible. Or we don't want to retire, but we don't have control over it. There is a way to behave in that season, even though you're not in control of it. Sometimes there's what is known as a dark night of the soul, a period of intense grief and loss. Some people try to repress that and just move on and skip it, only to their own harm. That's a time where life is telling us we need to mourn. We need to acknowledge the loss. And with faith, we can face the darkness and be transformed. And inevitably, we'll reach the season that is our last. And we don't have any control over that. It may come at the end of a long period of illness, or it may come suddenly without a whole lot of time. But it's a time for mourning, perhaps, a time for preparedness, spiritually speaking, a time for goodbyes. These seasons are out of our control, but they happen to all of us. Now, noting this, that talking of time in terms of seasons is speaking of duration, long periods, and noting that they're involuntary and we don't have any control over them, what do these things imply? Well, first of all, they imply that we should expect them. Just like we know when fall is coming, we know spring has arrived here, and we were able to prepare for it. You know that certain seasons of life are going to come upon you. Some of the ones that we just talked of in the examples we gave just a moment ago. They shouldn't catch us off guard. There's no excuse for that. There's predictability, even inevitability to these things. Peter was trying to bring this out to his readers, who seemed shocked that they had to suffer for the name of the Lord. Now look at 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12. He says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." When a Christian is mocked and ridiculed for his faith, he shouldn't be surprised by that. We know how the world responds to Christ. He is a stumbling block. He is an offense to the people with a worldly mindset. Don't be surprised by that kind of thing. A wise person will plan for the seasons that are surely to come and will know when they arrive. You can't prepare for every eventuality, but you can prepare for some of the certainties of life. And you can have a knowledge of the uncertainty of life in general and not be surprised even when that comes, because life is brief and it can be surprising. Another thing is we must use discernment to determine what season we are in. Have you stopped lately to ask yourself, what is unique about the particular time I'm living in now? What is the stage of life I'm in? What's the chapter of my book right now? And what does it call for? You know, as the text says in Ecclesiastes 3, there are different times to do different things. So what time is it for you right now? Is it time for you to plant? Or maybe it's time for you to pluck up. Is it time for you to kill some certain things in your life? Maybe a habit or a relationship that's toxic in your life? Or is it time to heal, to forgive? Is it time to break down? Is it time to build something up? Is it time to weep? Is it time to rejoice? Is it time to embrace? Maybe it's time to refrain from embracing. Is it time to keep or cast away, to seek, to lose? Is it time to keep silent? Maybe it's time to speak. Is it time to fight? Or is it time to make peace? There is a time for everything. Think about your time. What season are you in, and what does it call for? Furthermore, because of the seasons of our life, and because they're involuntary, we mustn't confuse our season with our identity. You know, too many of us look at the season we're in, and maybe it's a particularly painful season, and we believe it's all our fault. Or we believe we're being punished for something. Or maybe it's a really good season, and we seem to have a victory around every corner. We pat ourselves on the back and we give ourselves credit instead of thanking God for His blessings. Seasons come and seasons go. And we need to recognize that God is in control of all these things. Don't make the mistake of Job. When Job reached a very difficult season in his life, what did he do? He said, there's something wrong here. I'm not being treated fairly. If I had an audience with God and I was able to take him to court, I would win in court against God. At least that's what he was saying until the Lord appeared in a whirlwind and set him straight with a few questions of his own. Don't make the mistake of Job and his friends and say, this is a difficult season, so I'm being punished, or there's something wrong with me. It may not be that way. It may just be your time for mourning. And don't think because everything's going right or seems to be going right and everybody likes me and everything's going well that I am being rewarded in some way. It may just be that time for you. And right around the corner, things may change. You can't hasten a season's arrival or end. You have to be patient in the season, but you are not your season. There's a Fleet Foxes song that says, time's not what I belong to, and I'm not the season I'm in. You're not the same thing as your season. And another thing before we move on is that your relationship with God differs according to the season you're in. It's kind of like a good book. And a lot of you say this about the Bible, which is the best book of all. If you read through the Bible every year, or you've read through it many times, you find different things every time you go to it. And you'll read something, you'll think, how have I missed this my whole life? I know I've read over these words. How did I miss this thing that is so amazing and important to me now? Why wasn't it important to me then? Well, you were a different person then. And you were in a different season. Depending on the time period you're in, different things will stand out. Same is true of a movie or a piece of music. It'll come to new life because of what you're going through at the moment. It's very important for us to recognize time in this way. In these long periods of duration that differ, that call for different actions, that are most of the time involuntary and out of your control. It teaches us patience, and it teaches us the need for discernment. And so that's the first thing, a time for everything, a season for everything. Let's move in the second place to the maker of everything. All this talk of seasons and discernment raises a question. What standard do I use to judge the season I'm in and the appropriate action? If you come from a worldly point of view, there's one answer to that. And if you come from a godly point of view, there's an entirely different answer. A worldly point of view may say, you need to fight that season and seize control, because if you don't take care of yourself, nobody else is going to. But a godly point of view is going to look at things very differently. And it's going to call for God's way. And so I want to look at 5 ways in the text, Ecclesiastes 3, that wisdom dictates we orient our lives according to God. Here's the first one. Number 1, it says man's life is God's gift. Let's read verses 9 through 11. What gain has the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I've seen the business God has given to man. Business here is life, the work you do, your activities. And he says this is a gift. The work we're doing, the toil of life, we need to see that as something God has graciously bestowed on us. And it may be something that if we don't recognize this truth about the maker of everything, we might look at with disdain. We may not appreciate it for what it is. We may not see the blessings in it. We'll only look at the things that are wrong with it. Number 2, the wisdom teaches us that man's life should be occupied with God's work. Again, verse 10, I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. We have meaningful manners to keep us busy. God has work for us to do. Too often we occupy our time, our seasons, with meaningless, trivial activity. That's not to say that we should never take time to rest or never take time for recreation. Sometimes that is called for. Sometimes that's the season we're in. But it needs to be meaningful and purposeful, whatever it is. I love the prayer of Psalm 119:37, where the psalmist says, turn my eyes away from worthless things. As we're so distracted these days by too many activities and by our technology, which is designed to addict us and create habits of distraction, we need to pray that prayer more often. Turn my eyes away from worthless things. God has given us a business to be busy with. Are we occupying our time with that work or with work that is meaningless and trivial? Number 3, Solomon says man's life is beautiful when it's lived according to God's timing. If you discern your season and you act accordingly, you work according to the season, life has moments of indescribable beauty. Verse 11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. Make sure you don't stop the sentence before it's over. It doesn't say He's made everything beautiful, because there are things that are ugly in life. He's made everything beautiful in its time, when it's done according to the season, when it's appropriate. Sometimes tearing down is a beautiful thing. Of course, there are times to build. Sometimes mourning has a terrible beauty of its own. But of course, there are times to rejoice, and that is obviously beautiful. So when things are done appropriately in their season, they are beautiful. Number 4, man's life should seek God's purpose. Continue in verse 11. After he says, God has made everything beautiful in its time, he says also, He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. no matter how much we try to deny it and push it away from us, every human being is incurably religious. I've heard it put this way, there's a God-shaped hole in each and every one of us. Now, we come into a crisis in life when we try to stuff it full of worldly things. When we try ambition and we try to live for wealth, or we live for pleasure, or we live strictly for ourselves on our own terms. When we try to stuff that God-shaped hole full of worldly things, we are miserable creatures. And we say with Solomon, vanity of vanity, all is vanity, and vexation of spirit, and striving after the wind. But when we fill our hearts with God and His righteousness, and we put His kingdom first in our lives, we find that life is fulfilling and complete and beautiful in its time. One last point under this maker of everything. Man's life should be lived by God's wisdom. Did you catch the end of verse 11? Man cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. He admits, this wisest man who ever lived, there are some things that remain a mystery. No matter how long you think about it, no matter how much information's at your fingertips, no matter how long you research it, there are some things you will never, ever understand. There are questions that you want answers to that you may never find the answers to. I hear people say, well, that's something I want to ask the Lord about when I get to heaven. And I guess there'll be like a Q&A booth or something where you can line up to and ask God that question that you've had all your life. Where did Cain get his wife? And did Adam and Eve have belly buttons and things like that? Can God make a rock so big He can't pick it up? You know, these questions that we have. But I wouldn't be surprised if in heaven, even there, God says, there's no way you could ever understand it. Because God is higher than us. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And when we recognize that He is behind everything, that He's the one that controls the seasons, we release our need and our demand to know the answer to everything, and we start to lean on Him instead of our own understanding. We learn trust, and in faith we have peace. So it's very important as you're seeking to know what season you're in and to discern the proper activity within that season, it's very, very important to recognize the maker of everything and come at this discernment from a biblical, godly point of view. Let's go in the third place to the answers. Once you have that mindset, you are able to find discernment. Look at verses 12 through 14. I perceived, most translations say, I know that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceived, again, most translations have, I know that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before Him. Solomon's confidence is building here. Up to chapter 3, he's been very pessimistic. I tried labor, it was vanity. I tried pleasure, it was vanity. I tried wealth, it was vanity. I tried philosophy, and it was vain. And vexation of spirit, all is vanity. And then we get to chapter 3, and confidence is starting to build now. But there's a time for everything. Know your season, discern it. God is behind it all. Lean on Him. And now, with that understanding, he begins to say, there are things that I know. Twice in those 3 verses, we see the word, I perceived in the ESV. But in every other translation, I think it says, I know. Twice he says, I know. And 5 times he mentions God. His confidence is building. And in verse 14, he highlights two very important features of God's work. Now look at this. Verse 14, he says, number one, whatever God does endures forever. So God's work is permanent. And number two, he says, another thing that I know I can put together, even though a lot of what God does is a mystery to me. Number two, I know that whatever He does is complete. He says nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God's work is permanent and God's work is complete. So I need to orient my life around His work, what He has done. And the answer to life, whatever it may be, is wrapped up in what God is doing in this season. So once He's put that together, with that knowledge, we get an answer to the meaning of our seasonal existence. It's threefold. Number one, we are to enjoy the gift of life God has given us. Look at verse 12 again. I perceived, I know that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful. Yes, some seasons are difficult, but even in those difficult seasons, there are moments of joy. You know, one thing that people will come to me after a great loss in their life, and they'll say, you know, the other day, I was laughing. I actually allowed myself to have a good time, and I feel guilty about that. I shouldn't be enjoying anything right now. It brings disgrace to my loved one. I've heard that comment many times before. Maybe a lot of you have asked that before. But even in the worst of seasons, God has given us things to enjoy. That's the nature of the existence we're in. And it's okay to find that joy. It's momentary joy. I don't believe he's talking here necessarily about the joy that Christ gives us that endures through all things. He's talking about the simple pleasures of life. In every season we find them. Some it's easier to find than others. But the meaning of life, number one, life under the sun as we toil here, is to find the joy in simple pleasures of your work, of your family life, of your recreational life, of your educational life, whatever season you're in, rejoice, because life is a gift, however short it is. Number two, knowing that nothing belongs to you and everything belongs to God, do good as long as you live. He's been setting this up that we're not in control. This isn't our world. It's God's. And the word for our role is that we are stewards. We manage what has been given to us. We talk about stewardship mostly in connection with giving. You give to God because it's not yours to begin with. He's blessed you with it. So part of what He's given you to manage, you give back to Him for His purposes and His work. That's good context, but all life is stewardship. We are stewards. And as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4:2, it is required of stewards that they be faithful in what they manage. Knowing that everything belongs to God and this life we have belongs to God, we should use our life for good, not for selfish ambition and pride, and certainly not for evil. We should use the life He's given us to do good. So rejoice in the life God has given you. Do good with the life He's given you. And there's one last thing to this answer to everything. In your season, whatever season it is, rejoice, do good, and thirdly, fear God in all your thoughts and your decisions and your actions. Look at verse 14. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it or anything taken from it. So God has done it so that people fear before Him. Not terror, not being scared of God, but fear in the sense of reverence, respect, knowing His awesomeness. This is the conclusion of the book of Ecclesiastes. Most of you know how this book ends, where Solomon says, the conclusion of it all is this: fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It's not about pursuing your own ambition and pride. It's not about getting your way. It's about discerning the season and asking, what's God's will for this time? And respecting that to the point of obedience and faith. And so that's the answer to it all. See what season you're in and what that season calls for. And in your activities, whether it's mourning or rejoicing, whether it's plowing or harvesting, whatever the time calls for, do it with joy, use it to do good, and always fear God and keep His commandments. This is what makes man whole. It's what satisfies our soul. We frequently ask, who am I? Where am I? How am I supposed to live? We must also ask the question, when am I? What season is it? The answer is different depending on who you are. We're a group of people together who are walking together for the Lord, but in different seasons of life. And I think that that's all by divine arrangement. Because we're in different seasons, those of us who are in a particularly difficult season can lean on those of us who may be in an easier time in our lives. Those of us who are in a season of strength can hold up those who are in a season of weakness. We're here together for a reason. We're not supposed to walk through this life alone. Maybe you need some help. Maybe you need some prayer. We're going to sing an invitation song to encourage you. Maybe it's a season of realization and awakening where you understand it's time to change things in your life, time to repent. Maybe it's time to put on Christ in baptism and walk in newness of life. Whatever the season calls for, discern it and do it. And maybe it calls for action right now as we stand together and as we sing.